After 6 years of researching history, I'm no longer the same person. My worldview has radically changed, and in this episode I will tell you how and why. If you don't know me, I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and today I'm doing something different from the usual. I'm not going to talk about a topic I have researched, nor about what it's like to study history at university, nor about preconceived ideas I had about history that turned out to be false upon deeper investigation. This video is about my personal reflections on how history has significantly shaped my ideological shift and the skills I have developed through my work in history communication. Researching history has been the best decision of my life in terms of personal growth. I have gone from being on the far right to becoming an anarchist. So for those who may accuse me of manipulating Spanish history with leftist ideas I supposedly already had, you are completely wrong. It was the other way around. Reading hundreds of books and academic papers by serious historians forced me to change my ideology in the face of overwhelming evidence against my preconceived beliefs. And by the way, there is no such thing as a centrist or neutral history, as what that actually means is an ideological stance in favor of the status quo. Distrust anyone who claims to be objective. However, it's crucial to emphasize that this ideological shift wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had a genuine scientific curiosity to get as close as possible to quote-unquote real history. If you are not open to learning and only seek to confirm your own biases, it doesn't matter how much you read or consume educational content. You won't change your perspective. When I started with the History podcast in English back in 2018, I fit the typical profile of a history enthusiast interested in the political history of great men and conquests. Spain had just gone through years of an escalating Catalan independence movement, reaching its peak in October 2017. That was the dominant issue in Spanish politics at the time, and it deeply influenced my developing political views. I come from a small town in Girona, in northeast Spain, where most people support independence, but I didn't want to follow the herd. I wanted to form my own ideas. Besides, I naturally enjoy being contrarian and stirring things up. That, combined with the European and global rise of the far right, led me, like many other Gen Z guys, to fall into reactionary right-wing ideas. At a time in my life when I was searching for identity and dealing with youthful insecurities, I built my sense of self in opposition to Catalan nationalism, which in turn pushed me towards far-right Spanish nationalism. I spent a lot of time on online forums and listening to right-wing podcasts, and I was heavily influenced by anti-feminism, anti-communism, transphobia, Islamophobia, and xenophobia. I was a bit far gone. Spanish nationalist history was just another source of identity building for me. As historian Alejandro García San Juan put it, some people need the regular dose of identity-based self-esteem, and I was one of them. I didn't fully immerse myself in that world because I cared more about the things that are common in all far-right movements, but I was drawn to Spain's so-called glorious feats, the Reconquista, the conquests in the Americas, and the idea that there is a black legend or propaganda in many countries against Spain. That was my mindset when I decided to start sharing historical content in 2018, with the goal of learning more about my country's history, improving my English, and making money while studying business administration in Barcelona. Pro tip: don't get into history outreach if you want to make money. It's a losing game. Though you can help me minimize the losses with a donation or by supporting me on Patreon for exclusive benefits. Links below. When I started, I had no idea what I was getting into. I severely underestimated the amount of research required to study history properly. I thought consulting 3 or 4 old books would be enough because, well, history is history and doesn't change. Wrong. Completely wrong. Between 2018 and 2020, I was half misinforming and half sharing historical content about Spain on a podcast in English. But as I gradually conducted deeper research and used higher quality, more up-to-date sources, I started to deradicalize. Covering Spanish history in chronological order turned out to be unexpectedly helpful, because I had to study Al-Andalus rather than, say, Hernán Cortés' conquest of Mexico or other episodes typically used to glorify the Spanish Empire. When I got to the topic of the Reconquista and Palacios of Asturias, I encountered arguments against using the term Reconquista, but I rejected them because they clash with my preconceived beliefs. However, as I continued researching medieval history, I realized that defending the Reconquista narrative was unsustainable. That was my first step in recognizing that Spanish nationalism distorts and manipulates history just as much as the Catalan nationalism I despised. I also came to appreciate how fascinating and rich the history of Umayyad al-Andalus is. Maybe Muslims weren't as evil as I had been led to believe. Unconsciously, my growing interest in Andalusi history began to undermine my trust in Spanish nationalist historical narratives and my attachment to them, especially since the hegemonic Spanish nationalist discourse has always framed Islam as the eternal enemy of an inherently Catholic Spain. But I'm the kind of person who hates admitting I'm wrong, so my ideological shift was very slow. By late 2020, when I abandoned my English podcast and switched to making a history channel and podcast in Spanish, I was still right-wing. What had changed after 2 years of studying history more deeply was that I was no longer quite radicalized, and I had stopped buying into the far-right version of Spanish history. Once I started sharing content in Spanish, I quickly began researching far more rigorously than before. Even more nationalist myths and lies fell apart. I saw that all nationalisms are toxic, built on lies, and designed to create hatred and exclusionary identities. By 2021, I found myself politically undefined. History was forcing me to confront my own biases. It was pushing me to let go of my anger and learn to be more open-minded. Developing my research skills and learning how to cross-check information helped me cultivate critical thinking. I learned to always approach primary sources with caution, questioning the author's intent rather than taking everything at face value. I was already aware of the great responsibility of a history communicator to disseminate updated historiography rather than hoaxes and nationalist narratives. I have always prioritized what my conscience and morals dictate above all else, so I placed the pursuit of truth above profiting by selling lies, which would have been easier, considering there are people selling courses on Spanish history against the Black Legend or praising Franco. I also had a genuine love for exploring history for myself. In 2022, I was still particularly fixated on criticizing Catalan nationalism, but I had already moved towards social democracy, which is the most widely accepted position in Spain, and I openly rejected equally harmful Spanish nationalist narratives. In 2023, I became aware that I now identified as left-wing, and by late 2023 or early 2024, I felt courageous enough to take the step of learning about anarchism. The social democratic phase was necessary because one cannot suddenly shift from the far right to anarchism, which is as far left as one can go. And now that is what I am, an anarchist. This doesn't simply mean being against the state as many people mistakenly believe, but rather opposing all hierarchies. This means rejecting capitalism and the boss-worker relationship, rejecting the state, rejecting religion because humans should not be servants of God, and rejecting the idea that men are superior to women and that some ethnicities are above others, or that certain sexual preferences are more valid than others. If there is one thing I have learned from studying history, it is that hierarchies are what enable large-scale evil. The harm a single individual can cause is limited, but behind a hierarchical machinery like a state, a few individuals can be responsible for thousands of deaths or the suffering of millions of people. Hierarchies make it seem like an obligation to obey a superior, even if they have no idea what they are talking about and could drive a nation or company to disaster. Or hierarchies make discriminating against an entire ethnic group acceptable. Power imbalances and relationships of dependency corrupt everything. They turn those who obey into apathetic individuals, devoid of initiative and creativity, capable of acting against their own conscience. Meanwhile, those in power, by parasitically restricting the potential development of others, also impoverish their own existence. Think about how many medical and technological advancements have been lost because talented individuals, lacking financial resources or facing discrimination, were unable to receive a proper education. The elites prefer workers and citizens without creativity, intelligence, or critical thinking rather than risk losing the social control that keeps them in a privileged position. All of this serves to uphold a social order that has repeated itself throughout Spain's written history and that of the world. A society of rulers and ruled, exploiters and exploited, oppressors and oppressed. The principle of authority is always justified in the same way, by claiming that the masses are foolish and incapable of governing themselves, and therefore must submit to the benevolent yoke of a supposedly just and wise ruler. Yet nothing is ever said about what makes these particular individuals special, what grants them the self-appointed right to rule, and why people should entrust their freedom to them rather than to themselves. When I was right-wing, I accepted the principle of authority as natural because that is what you are taught from childhood, to the point of failing to recognize it as oppressive. I admired the stories of social ascent, of people who came from nothing and became rich and powerful. This was because, like many others, I did not want to identify as working class. I had aspirations for something greater, clinging to the myth that success is possible if you work hard enough. However, over time, I have seen that reality is not like that. I have developed class consciousness and now identify much more with the oppressed than with the oppressors. Studying history has also made me more empathetic. Now I see people with emotions like mine, where before I sometimes only saw numbers and statistics from the perspective of the powerful who look down on those below them as cattle to be exploited. I can put myself in the shoes of the thousands of tenants in Barcelona who in 1931 went on a strike and stopped paying the crashing rent prices, or in those of the 9,000 gypsy people of all ages and sexes who were captured and separated from their families in an attempt to exterminate them in the 18th century. I made videos about these topics, so I encourage you to check them out. I am not in the social position of the rulers but of the ruled, which is why I have become more interested in history from below rather than a history of courts and wars. Before, when I was a man of order, I automatically saw any popular movement involving violence against the status quo as wrong. But if the status quo is unjust and the system oppressive, why should the people negatively affected by it simply remain silent and obedient? Why should I condemn the revolts and revolutions of the exploited against their exploiters, who exercise systematic daily violence? Why should figures like the Spanish conquistadors in the Americas, who climbed the social ladder by trampling, oppressing, and exploiting others, be admired? Why is decolonization expected to be non-violent when colonization and the colonial order themselves are violent? Why is state violence seen as more legitimate than resistance to it? Why should I accept that the rich keep getting richer while others struggle more and more to make ends meet? Why should I accept unequal social relationships to which I have never given my consent? Why should I submit my freedom to the will of another person? If I care more about what happens to the powerful and property-owning classes, then, whether consciously or not, I am saying that the lives of the servants are worth less than those of the rulers. In the end, there are two opposing philosophies in how the right and the left understand and accept the world. One philosophy is to play by the system's rules and try to improve one's position within it, no matter how unjust it is or how many people you screw in the process. The other is to see the established order of inequality as unacceptable and to fight against the system. What about you? Have my history videos changed how you see the world? Or has what you have learned in your own journey of discovering history changed you? Please tell me your perspective in the comments. I will leave Malatesta's article Anarchy and the ABC of Communist Anarchism by Alexander Berkman below in case anyone wants an introduction to anarchism. I think they are a great read. And as always, if you are new, I encourage you to subscribe and support the show with a donation or through a subscription at patreon.com/newhistoryspain. Thank you for being there and see you soon!